This encounter happened in the summer of 2006 when I was 20 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until January of that year, and driving opened up so many doors for me that I took a lot of solo road trips to my friend's house in New England. I also looked young for my age and was often mistaken for a high school student in my early 20s. I was driving alone on I-78 on a random July day on my way to visit my friend in southern PA for a long weekend. Her parents were away, and we had the house to ourselves, and were planning on drinking and hot tubbing and watching Planet Earth drunk. Maybe run around some cornfields at night. I was so excited and had a great drive, listening to good music, and it was a beautiful day for driving. Right after I crossed the border from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I stopped at one of the first rest shops to get gas and snacks for the last part of my drive. I was heading into a store when the man in his late 20s, early 40s approached me. He was a stocky guy, decently tall, maybe about 5'1", had on a plain black tee and jeans with dark brown hair and a mustache. He had come out of a black pickup truck parked a few spaces away from my car. He had a super intense gaze and immediately creeped me out. He just had a crazy energy about him. He stood too close. His gaze was crazy, direct, and focused. His word choice was strange. Immediately set off all of my alarms. He asked if I was from the area, despite my Connecticut license plate, where I was headed, and if I knew of anything fun to do because he had plans later, and time to kill beforehand. He invited me to go play mini golf or watch a movie with him. I didn't answer any of his questions, declined his invitation to hang out, and told him I didn't know the area, then walked away towards the store. I was blown away that he asked me to go somewhere with him. It was so random and uncomfortable. As I was walking away, he actually screamed out, "You're gorgeous!" And the volume and tone made my hair stand on end. It was super aggressive and inappropriate, and he startled a family walking out of the store. It was so loud. I didn't turn around, but just went inside. He came into the store shortly after and was staring at me. So I went to go use the bathroom and stayed in front for at least 10 minutes texting my friend about this creep. When I came out, he wasn't in the store anymore, so I took my time buying drinks and snacks. Went out to gas up my car. I was relieved his car was gone and started thinking about the rest of my drive and getting excited to go see my friend. When I pulled up to the road to get back onto the highway, I hear someone persistently honking his horn and see this creep show on the dirt road parallel to the on-ramp in his truck honking, shouting and waving at me to drive over to him. He was directly facing the gas station and had been waiting for me to pull up. I immediately freaked out and jumped on the ramp back to I-78. He pulled onto the highway after me, and I called my friend extremely scared. I drove so fast and probably dangerously. Looking back, I'm lucky that I didn't get into an accident, but I didn't know what to do at the time. He didn't follow me for that long, and I think after a few exits, he pulled off. My friend and I had a backup plan that if I saw his car again, she would direct me to a police station the next town over from her house instead of me going directly there and leading some freak to us. I didn't see the car again and went to my friend's, but the last hours of the drive I was extremely tense and anxious. I remember checking my mirrors regularly for this black pickup truck. It all ended well. I got to my friend's house safely, and we had a nice weekend. The encounter was definitely creepy, but over the years, I didn't put much thought into it. A few years ago, which was around 2014, I was talking with another friend who was big into serial killers, and mentioned my encounter jokingly, suggesting this was a serial killer I had met, and told her my experience. She was fascinated, and wanted to Google active serial killers in Pennsylvania area at the time. The first hit was for Adam Leroy Lane, and he looked almost exactly like the man I met back in 2006. Obviously, it could be my mind filling in the blanks. But the basic characteristics, 40s, tall but stocky, brown hair with a mustache, and the time and area all match. In my memory, he was a little bit slimmer than the pictures. And it was 2006, not 2007, when he was actually convicted of murdering women. Still, it's an odd coincidence, and one that I have never forgotten. So a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years, retired, and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper/tax prep. He wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers, or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. This all took place in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1999. I remember the date well, because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit. My dad would let me drive him to and from work just to get some experience on the road, both at day and at night. I was sitting in my usual spot at the table that I was set at along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run to the registers, stock the coolers at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up to our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on I-75. This in itself was really strange, because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere, and was completely too used to cell phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting just a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride up to the next big town up north from us. Ocala was the town. This is pretty important. My dad lets her know that he's working and there's no way that he can take her. She turns and then looks at me, and while she is looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and suddenly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns back to my dad and points at me, asking if I can take her. My dad responded back that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I had done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad, since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Turns out he had a bad vibe about her from the minute that she had walked into the store. Well, she cusses him out for a minute, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she had slammed it. Then she stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back up to the interstate, and then starts up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passes, and I'm in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I hear my dad yelling from the living room, "Son, get your ass in here, and look at this." I quickly run to the living room and see my dad pointing at the TV, and look at the mugshot of the lady up on the screen, and immediately remember the lady who had been in the store. Turns out I almost gave a car ride to Aileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer, and then later put to death. Still have nightmares about what could have happened that day if my dad hadn't had that bad feeling about this woman. This is not my experience. This was my grandmother's experience in the fall of 1974. My grandmother was 30 years old and worked as many as 4 jobs throughout the week to take care of my dad. She worked at a popular steakhouse restaurant called Moonraker. This steakhouse was upscale and attracted all different types and had some regulars who would stop in every single week. One of these regulars wasn't from Utah. He was new in town. He would call ahead every week before Thursday to make sure his preferred table was available. My grandmother was the hostess and worked almost every single night. Thursday night each week, this handsome, polite, well-dressed and charismatic stranger would come in and chat with my grandmother before she seated him. This handsome man was Ted Bundy. My grandmother recalls Bundy being very gentlemanly, never flirtatious, never rude, very clean-cut and friendly. He presented himself extremely well. He'd ask her how she was doing and always greeted her by name when he called in or arrived at the restaurant. He showed up nearly every single Thursday night for about 3 or 4 months. Then one week, he didn't call and didn't show up again. On a couple of occasions, he would ask my grandmother if she would serve him liquor from the bar, but she didn't work in the bar area, so she couldn't. Ted replies, "Oh, that's right. I forget we're in Utah. They're so strict here." This was in Murray, Utah, and the restaurant, which has now been remodeled and is now a Denny's, is in the Fashion Place Mall, where Carol Durant was abducted by Bundy and later escaped. Besides the fact that later on it came to light that Bundy was a serial killer. What's really scary is one of my grandmother's co-workers at the restaurant went missing during that fall. They later found her by Salt Lake City Airport, and it's suspected that she was a victim of Bundy. My grandma told me that she's glad she wasn't some cut little thing working in the restaurant at the time. She wasn't Bundy's type, or else who knows what could have happened. Fun fact, she also mentioned that Bundy's table had a good view of the doors. It was close to the back exit. No surprise there. He also preferred the non-smoking section, and liked to get many bottles of hard liquor from the bar. She always knew it was him when she saw his light tan Beetle pulling into the small parking lot. It wasn't until later that she saw Ted on TV, on the news, and she was in complete shock about everything that she heard. In 2006, I was a college student at ASU. I lived in an off-campus apartment, and it was a block off of a major street here in Phoenix called Baseline. These details are very important. In the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by 2 serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of 2 guys randomly shooting people, and the other one was the Baseline killer. Having 2 killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time of Newsweek about the situation. So, the fall of 2006 semester had just started. Now you may have heard this, but Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment, so I'd leave the window cracked a little bit because the morning air is pretty nice. The blinds provided visual cover. Anyways, one morning, a strange sound woke me up. It was the crack of dawn, around 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming up. It was a sound of someone lightly tapping on the window, and it seemed intentional in my tired state. I figured it would be a bird or some branches or something trivial. Tap, 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 then silence. After about 90 seconds of nothing, the tapping returned, and it was absolutely purposeful. I was positive that it was a human producing this noise. I thought that it was my boyfriend, who thought it was cute to try and scare me sometimes. I decided that I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait, but I was also getting really angry. How dare he pull a prank when I'm trying to sleep? This is just like him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind about disturbing my sleep like this. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my stupid boyfriend who thought that this would be funny. But I saw some movement through the slit of the blinds, and I marched over and yanked the blinds so that I could see. It was definitely not my boyfriend. I said very loudly, "What the fuck?" He sort of just was taken aback by the anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever, or more specifically, his eyes, and the feeling they gave me was insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice of how terrifying his eyes were. They looked like black orbs with no white in them. Absolutely predatory. When I see pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what he looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different when you experience it in person. It totally floored me. Something about this man was profoundly wrong. He was crouched down, like an umpire. He had on dark pants, a dark purple hat, and dark Nike pants. He had dark skin. I thought he was Hispanic, but later I found out he was a light-skinned black guy. Anyways, after I yelled at him, he whispers to me, "Can I talk to you?" If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, just whisper that sentence out loud to someone or yourself right now. It still sends chills down my spine when I think about how that sounded. His hands subtly moved towards his waist. I later learned he would blitz attack his victims, and he probably had a gun on him. All that separated us was a mesh screen. Now this is about a 3-second interaction at this point. For some reason, I thought of Ted Bundy and how he'd pretend to be crippled to target his victims. I thought of my mom telling me not to be nice to strangers. Don't be afraid to be a bitch. My thinking wasn't so calculated, but it was more nano-processing of how to deal with the situation. So when he whispered that, I started yelling at him, "Hell no, get the fuck out of here, douchebag." I shut the window angrily and then locked it. I can't overemphasize how incredibly irritated I was at this person and how they had the audacity to disturb my precious sleep. I laid back down and wondered if I'd been too mean. What if he actually needed help? But that didn't really make any sense. Why would he be, tapping and whispering if he was truly in trouble? I decided he was a creep after all. I was too annoyed to go back to sleep, but I sort of laid back down anyways. I told my roommate about an hour later, and she sort of jokingly asked if it could have been the baseline killer. When she said that, my heart sank. His face looked exactly like it did in the police sketches that were on billboards everywhere. The only problem is that those billboards showed him with dreads, and the man at my window had none. Apparently he was some sort of disguise artist who'd wear wigs. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that he sounded like this was his M.O. The suspect would say something to throw off his target, and then he'd blitz attack them. The detective said that my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle, and he moved on. The only problem was that I thought the guy looked Hispanic, and the detective said many witnesses described him as black. I thought they might want to come out and try for samples or surveillance video or something, but I didn't hear back from the detective at all. My parents freaked out, got us knives, pepper spray, and then put up signs. Some people asked why I didn't get a gun. I can't remember why I didn't get one at the time, but I remember it being something I was open to when my dad brought it up. We learned another tenant had complained that same morning. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the damn complex trying to find a target. The stupid apartment wouldn't let us out of our lease, so we moved to the second floor apartment right above our old unit. Anyways, on September 4th of 2006, they arrested him. I think the detective didn't call me back because they were days away from arresting him. When I saw his mugshot, I was sick, but I was also relieved. He was absolutely the guy outside my window. To me, he looked like he could have been Hispanic. You can judge for yourself if you Google it. He's on death row in Arizona right now. His wife tried to mount some campaign to show that the police were framing him or something. On a personal level, it certainly would make for an interesting coincidence if this poor innocent man who they framed was also whispering like a creep and tapping on my window. I can't think of something more scary than a serial killer tapping on your window. That actually happened to me, and if it happens to you, just scare them right back. Don't be afraid to downright be rude to someone who's injecting themselves into your space. It could definitely save your life if you're not afraid to throw your weight around and tell someone off. Trust yourself. You can still be kind and a generous person and still tell someone to go fuck themselves.